On a Tuesday morning in June, the woman who had carried my mail for 26 years stopped her truck at the end of my lane and did not hand me anything. She sat there with the engine running and one arm out the window, and she said, "Vern, somebody has been taking your mail on purpose since the 5th of March, and I am probably going to lose my job for telling you." Hold on to that a minute, because it is the shape of everything that came after. She knew what it was going to cost her. She said it anyway. And standing there in the gravel with my coffee going cold in my hand, I had no idea I was in trouble of any kind. A year later, that is still the piece I cannot get my hands around. A man can be robbed for 5 months and never once feel a hand in his pocket. My name is Vern Stucky. Everybody calls me Vern. I am 79, and I have lived every year of it in Holtz County, South Dakota, about 9 miles out of a town called Pelland, which has a grain elevator, 2 churches, a post office the size of a machine shed, and a cafe that only opens for breakfast because that is the only meal anybody around here eats away from home. I drilled water wells for 43 years. My father drilled before me. If you live within about 60 miles of where I am sitting right now, there is a decent chance the water coming out of your kitchen tap is coming up a hole that I made. Now, one thing first, and it is a real question, not just something to say. Wherever you are listening to this, there is a sound your mail makes when it comes. Maybe it is a metal lid that bangs and then bangs again because it never shuts right the first time. Maybe it is a slot in your front door and a soft slap on the floorboards. Maybe it is tires on gravel and a little squeak of brakes and then nothing at all. Tell me what that sound is where you live. And if you know the name of the person who brings it to you, put that down too. I have got a reason for asking, and you will understand it before we are done. Now, let me tell you about water because you cannot understand what happened to me without it. People think a well driller is looking for water. That is not really the job. Water is down there most places in this part of the world. What you are doing is finding out the truth about a piece of ground, and the ground will not just tell you. The Dakota sand runs under a lot of this country, and it has been under here longer than anything any of us has an opinion about. Some places it is generous, some places you punch through and get a smell of sulfur and a flow you cannot shut off. Some places you spend 2 days in a pile of a farmer's money and you get a hole full of nothing, and you have to walk up to the house and tell him so. A dry hole is not a lie. It is an answer you paid for. I used to say that to the young men who worked for me, and they never liked it much. Here is the other thing about a well, and it is the thing I have been chewing on for a year now. When the pump is running, you cannot learn anything. The water is moving, the level is pulled down, the gauge is jumping, everything is noise. You have to shut the pump off. You have to let it sit and get quiet. And then, when nothing is happening at all, the water comes back up to where it really wants to be, and that number is the truth. We call that the static level, and a well only tells you the truth when the pump is off. I have a steel tape with a brass weight on the end of it. My dad bought it used in 1958. You take a piece of blue carpenter's chalk and you rub it on the bottom 15 feet of that tape, and you lower it down the casing until you feel it go slack. And when you pull it back up, the water has washed a clean, bright line right through the chalk. You read where that line is, and you write it down. The first Sunday of every month, after church, I have measured the house well. I have done that since 1985. Alma used to stand at the top and read the number out loud, and I would write it in a spiral notebook with a carpenter's pencil, and then we would go in and eat. 41 years of first Sundays. The notebooks live in a coffee can on the shelf above the washer, and there are 11 of them in there, and the rubber band on the first one dry rotted and broke a long time ago. Alma was my wife, 54 years. She has been gone 3 years this coming October. She kept the books for the drilling outfit, and she kept the house, and she kept me, and she had a way of doing all three at the same time that I did not properly notice until the day it stopped. She had a nail driven into the door casing by the back porch, right at eye level, and every piece of mail that came into this house went onto that nail until it was dealt with. Bills on the nail. Church bulletin on the nail. If a thing came off that nail, it was because it had been paid, answered, or thrown away. I never once in 54 years had to wonder where a piece of paper was. We had one son, Dean. He died at 49 of a heart that quit on him in a bean field, and I am not going to spend much of your time on that, not because it does not matter, but because it is the only subject in my life I still cannot handle in front of people. Dean left a boy named Colby. Colby is 34 now. He runs a custom harvesting outfit, which means he owns machinery worth more than my whole life, and he chases the wheat north every summer from Oklahoma up through Kansas and Nebraska and home again. He has a wife named Shay and a little girl named Prue, who is 7 and who is not afraid of anything, including the bull snake that lives under my stock tank. After Alma's funeral, Colby stayed 2 extra days. And on the second day, he sat at that kitchen table and looked at the stack of envelopes that had gotten away from me, and he said, "Grandpa, let me take the paper off your hands. You should not have to fool with all this." "Fair is fair, so I will say it," he offered it kindly, and I told him yes. So now you know everything I knew, standing in my own lane in June with a mail truck idling in front of me. Del Hauser has driven Route 2 out of Pelham since her kids were little. She is 58 years old. She wears a straw hat the wind has been working on for a decade, and she has hauled my dog home twice. She said the change of address had been filed on the 5th of March. She said that since that day she had been putting nothing in my box and taking nothing out of it, and she had figured I had moved to town the way people my age do, and she had felt bad about not getting to say goodbye. Then she said that a week ago at the cafe, somebody mentioned seeing my truck at the elevator, and she had gone home and sat on it for 6 days. She told me she was not supposed to talk to me about it. She said it twice. She said, "Vern, I am not allowed to discuss another customer's order with you, and what I just did was talk about an order, and I know exactly what that means." Then she put the truck in gear and went on down the road to the Ostermans, because she had a route to run. I stood there a while. Then I went in the house and opened the drawer under the telephone where things go now, and I looked at Alma's nail on the door casing, and it was empty, and it had been empty for so long that the paint had started to look normal around it. I tried to remember the last envelope I had held in my hand. I could not do it. Not the last bill, not the last statement, not one. And here is what I had been telling myself for 5 months without ever once saying it out loud, that the county was slow, that everything is on computers now, that a man gets less mail than he used to. That is not what was happening. Something had been arriving somewhere else since the 5th of March, and it had been arriving every single week, and somebody had been opening it. I did not sleep that night, and I want to be honest about why. It was not fear. It was that I could not find the beginning of it. In my trade, when a well goes bad, you do not start guessing. You go get the log. Every hole I ever drilled, I wrote down as I went. Depth, formation, color of the cuttings, where the water came in, how much, how fast. And since 1975, the state has required a driller to send that log in, so every one of those holes is sitting in a state office right now where anybody in the world can look it up, including you, including the man who owns that farm today and never met me. Young fellows always wanted to write the log up at the end of the day, from memory, sitting in the truck with a cold pop. I would not let them. You log the hole as you go. You cannot log it after you pull the pipe, because once that pipe is out of the ground, all you have got left is what you think you remember, and what you think you remember is worth nothing. I had spent 5 months living off what I thought I remembered, so the next morning, I put on a shirt with a collar and I went to town to start logging the hole. The post office in Pelland opens at 8:30. Bud Seacat has run it for 19 years. He is a big, slow, careful man who used to play tackle for the school here and who now knows more about the private lives of 400 people than any priest in this county and has never repeated a syllable of it to a living soul. I told him what Dell had told me. I did not use her name. He studied me a while and then he said, "Vern, you do not have to protect anybody in here." He typed for a minute and then he stopped typing and I watched his jaw go tight, and that told me more than anything on his screen. He said a change of address had been filed on my name on the 5th of March. Filed over the internet. Everything on Route 2 coming to my box was being forwarded to a post office box in another town, about 40 miles from here. I asked him who did it. He said he could not tell me that, and he was not being cute about it. He truly could not, and then he told me a thing that has not left me alone one day since. He said, "Vern, when somebody files one of those, we mail a letter to the old address, to this address, to you. It says a change of address has been requested, and here is what to do if it was not you." I stood there in the lobby with the flag hanging over the counter and the pens on their little chains, and I remembered it. Early spring. A cold day. A plain envelope with the postal eagle on it, no stamp on it, the kind of thing that looks like it is trying to sell you a supplemental insurance plan. I had carried it from the box to the burn barrel and never opened it, because I get 4 of those a week. And at my age, a man quits reading advertising somewhere around 2004. They told me. They put it in my hand, and I burned it. I have been a careful man my entire working life. I have stood on a rig floor for 43 years and never lost a finger and never lost a man because I check things. And I threw away the one piece of paper that would have stopped the whole business in the middle of March. I have to live with that. I am telling it on myself deliberately because it is the cheapest lesson in this story and it cost me the most. If a letter comes to your house that says somebody asked to move your mail and you did not ask, that is not junk, that is the smoke detector. Bud got me a form. He told me what to write on it and where to send it, and he said the people who look into this kind of thing are called postal inspectors, and they are federal, and he said, and I am quoting him, they are not fast, but they are not lazy either. I filled it out standing at that counter with a pen on a chain, and my handwriting came out bad, and I did it over. Then I drove 3 blocks to the courthouse because the mail was only the door. It was not the room. Holtz County Courthouse is brick, built in 1922, with a set of stairs worn into a curve in the middle from 100 years of people walking up them with something on their mind. The treasurer's office is on the main floor to the left. There is a counter and a window and a bowl of butterscotch candy that has been there my whole adult life. The deputy treasurer is a woman named Janelle Croy. She is maybe 40. I drilled the well at her folks' place before she was born. And I asked her the question that a stranger taught me at that exact window in 1989. I need to tell you about that, because I am not a smart man and I do not want anybody thinking I figured any of this out on my own. In 1989, I was in there paying my own taxes, and there was an old woman ahead of me in a canvas chore coat with a scarf tied under her chin, and she was arguing with the clerk in a very calm voice about a statement she had not received. And the clerk kept telling her it had been mailed, and the old woman said, "I am not asking whether you mailed it, I am asking whose name is on the card." The clerk went and looked and came back different in the face, and they went in the back room, and I never found out one thing about how it turned out. The old woman went out the door, and I never saw her again, and I do not know her name. But I have carried that sentence in my head for 37 years like a spare fuse. So I said it to Janelle. I said, I want to know whose name is on the card. I want to know what address the county has got for the tax statements on my ground. She turned the screen around so I could see it. That was a kindness, and I want that on the record. The mailing address on my home quarter, the quarter with my house and my well and my dad's shop building on it, was a post office box in another town. The same box the mail was going to. It had been changed on the 10th of March, 5 days after the other one. And it had not been changed on a computer. Somebody had walked into that office and stood where I was standing and filled out a card and signed it. I asked to see the card. Janelle said, "That is a public record, and you do not even have to give me a reason." And she went and got it. I want to describe what it is like to look at a piece of paper with your grandson's handwriting on it and your own address crossed out. It is not rage. I have been trying for a year to find an honest word for it, and the closest I can get is that it felt like the moment when you realize you have been walking around town all afternoon with your shirt buttoned wrong and everybody saw it and nobody said anything. It is not anger. It is shame. And it is a peculiar kind of shame because I had not done anything and I still felt like I had been caught. Then Janelle said, "Since you are here, do you want to look at the account?" She did not say it in a hard way. She said it the way a nurse says, "I am going to put my hand on your arm now." 2 years of real estate taxes on the home quarter were unpaid. All of it, not late, not partial, unpaid. And on the third Monday of December at 9 o'clock in the morning, in that same building, the county had held its annual sale and sold a tax certificate on my place. The way it works here is that people bid, and they do not bid the price up, they bid the interest rate down, and whoever will take the smallest rate of return gets the certificate. It is not a sale of the ground, it is a sale of the debt. And it starts a clock. The certificate on my home quarter had been bought by an outfit called Meadowlark Land Holdings. I had never heard of it. I asked her who that was. She said the county does not know and does not ask. They gave a mailing address and a good check, and that is the whole of the county's business with them. I stood there a minute, and I could hear the clock on the wall, the big one, the kind with a second hand that jerks. And then Janelle said the thing that put a hand around my heart. She said, "Vern, I hate to tell you this in a hallway, but somebody was in here 11 days ago asking what it would take to get a deed." I took the long way home, out past the old Lindquist place and up the river road, and I never turned the radio on. Let me tell you the one thing I did not do, because I believe it is the only move in this whole story I got right. I did not call Colby. Every part of me wanted to. I had his number in my shirt pocket and a whole speech built by the time I got to the bridge. I did not make that call, and patience had nothing to do with it because I have never had any. It was because of a log. If I had called him that afternoon, here is exactly what would have happened. He would have had an answer. He is quick, and he is likable, and he has been talking to bankers and farmers since he was 19 years old. And he would have had a reason for the box and a reason for the card, and it would have sounded fine, and I would have wanted it to sound fine because he is my boy's boy and he has got my son's hands. And then he would have known I was looking. And every piece of paper after that would have been written by a man who knew I was looking. You do not log the whole from memory. You log it as you go. So that night, I got a fresh spiral notebook out of the drawer, the same kind I use for the water, and I started at the top of a clean page, and I wrote down the 5th of March, and the 10th of March, and the 3rd Monday of December, and the words Meadowlark Land Holdings, and I wrote down 11 days ago, and I underlined that. Then I looked at what I had written, and I understood for the first time that the dates were in the wrong order for an accident. A man who forgets to pay a tax bill does not, 5 days later, go stand at a counter and fill out a card. The next Monday, I drove to Huron and sat down with a lawyer named Adele Pretty. She is 66 years old. She does what they call elder law, and her office is above a shoe store and smells like the shoe store. I had never used a lawyer for anything in my life except buying ground and burying people. I put my spiral notebook on her desk and I told it to her in order. It took 11 minutes. She did not interrupt me one time. Then she said, "All right, first thing, and I want you to hear this before you hear anything else. Nobody has taken your farm." I said, "They sold it." She said, "No, they sold what you owed. In this state, that certificate is a receipt for a debt, and the ground is still yours, and it stays yours until a deed actually issues, and you can pay that debt off and end the whole thing at any time before that happens. It is called redemption, and it is your right, and nobody has to agree to let you do it." I asked her how much time I had, and she said something that I did not expect. She said, "More than you think, because they have not done the part that starts the clock. Before anybody can turn a certificate into a deed on your place, they have to serve you personally with a written notice that they intend to do it, and then they have to give you 60 more days on top of that to pay." She said, "Have you been served with anything?" I said no. She said, "Then the 60 days has not started. You have not been given notice at your home by anybody. They have been sending everything to a post office box that they themselves put on the county's card, and mailing a notice to a box that a man set up for himself is not notice to you. That is a man writing letters to his own address." I sat there in that chair with my hat on my knee, and I felt the floor come back under me a little bit. And then she set her glasses down on the desk blotter and asked me the question that turned this whole thing around, and she asked it in a completely ordinary voice, the way you would ask a man if he wanted more coffee. She said, "Vern, who was supposed to be paying these taxes?" I said, "I was, I suppose." She said, "No. Think, not who owned the land, who was supposed to be paying them." And I sat there, and the room got very quiet, and I heard the shoe store bell go off downstairs. And I remembered the lease. 3 years ago, before Alma got sick, Colby came out and asked if he could farm the home quarter. He wanted a place close to his shop to put a seed corn plot on, and he wanted a hard base of ground of his own name for the operating loan, and I said sure. And Alma, who did not do a handshake for anything larger than a hayrack, sat down at that kitchen table and typed up one page on the same typewriter she had used to do the drilling invoices since 1971. One page. Both of us signed it. Colby signed it. It says he farms the quarter, and it says that instead of cash rent, he pays the real estate taxes and the insurance on it, and that is the rent. That was the rent. That was the whole rent. That is what the ground cost him. I told Adele that, and she got very still, and then she said, "Do you have a copy of that?" And here is where my wife reached out of the ground and put her hand on my shoulder. Because Alma had a rule. She said papers that have to live outside go in a bread bag. Any document that might ever have to be dug out in the weather went into a bread bag with a twist tie and got put in the bottom of the toolbox on the drill truck, because that is the one place on this farm that has never leaked, never burned, and never been thrown out by a man cleaning up. The lease was in the bread bag, under a set of drill bits and a spool of 8-gauge wire, 3 years of dust on it, and not one speck of dirt inside the plastic. Let me stop the story for 1 minute and talk to you straight across the table, because the next part is where the whole thing turned, and I would like you sitting here when it does. If any of this is ringing familiar, if you know somebody who took the paper off somebody else's hands, or if you are the one whose hands it came off of, then stay with me and subscribe, because what saved me is coming up in about 2 minutes, and it cost nothing, and it was not clever, and there is not one person hearing this who could not have done it. Here is what Adele told me, and she told it to me slowly, twice, because she said she wanted me to be able to repeat it to myself in the night. A man who is under an obligation to pay the taxes on a piece of ground cannot turn around and buy that ground at a tax sale. He cannot get title that way. It does not work. If he goes down there and puts his money on the counter, the law does not treat it as a purchase at all. It treats it as him finally paying what he already owed. He does not get a farm. He gets a receipt. She said it is one of the oldest ideas in property law, and the reason for it is about as plain as a fence post. You are not allowed to profit off of your own failure to do the thing you promised to do. If a man could let the taxes go on purpose and then buy the place for the price of the taxes, then every tenant in America would own his landlord's farm inside of 3 years. I said, so what did he buy? And Adele Pretty put her chin down and looked straight across that desk at me and said, if it is him, then he did not buy your place. He paid a bill he already owed 2 years late, with interest, in public, in front of the whole county, and he had to bid against strangers for the privilege. I have thought about that sentence probably 400 times. Then she said, but we have to prove it is him. Right now, all we have is a card and a box. So she filed a request with the Secretary of State, which is a thing you can do sitting at your own kitchen table for free. And 2 days later, we knew who Meadowlark Land Holdings was. The organizer of record was listed under a name I did not know at first, a woman's name first and last, and the last name was Beckman. Beckman is Shay's maiden name, my grandson's wife, who has never in her life had $200 she did not tell somebody about, who cried at my kitchen table when Alma died. And there was a second name on that filing, a man from over east, somebody with money. I did not get to look into him right away, though, because 4 days later the bill came due, and it did not come due for me. I was at the co-op getting a barrel of oil, and a fellow I have known since grade school, a decent man, came around the end of the counter and said, Vern, is it true about the mail lady? I said, what about her? He said, they took her off the route. She is home. He said, I heard she got into somebody's mail. I want you to understand what I felt right then, because it was not confusion. I understood it instantly and completely, the way you understand a sound in the night that you have never heard before, but you know exactly what it is. Colby had filed a complaint on her. I found out the details later, and they were worse than I guessed. He had written that Del Hauser had been holding his grandfather's mail, that she had been discussing his grandfather's private business around town, that his grandfather was 79 years old and confused, and that this carrier had been feeding him ideas. She was put on administrative leave, 26 years on that route, and she was sitting in her own kitchen on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock with nothing to do. And it worked, is the thing. It worked beautifully. Because in a county like this one, the moment there are 2 stories, everybody quits looking at either of them and starts looking at their shoes. I drove out to her place. She would not let me in the house. She stood on the step with her arms folded and she said, Vern, you cannot be here. There is a thing going on and you are in it, and me talking to you is exactly what they are saying. I did. I said, I will fix it. And she said the words that took the skin off me. She said, I know you will try. That is what she said. Not, you cannot. Not, it is too late. She said, I know you will try, and then she went in the house. She spent her job on me before I knew I was in trouble. And now, I was standing in her yard offering to try. The next 2 weeks were the bottom of it, and I'm going to leave the polish off because somebody hearing this is sitting in their own version of those 2 weeks right now, and lying to them about how it feels would be a poor way to repay them for listening. It was not dramatic. Nobody shouted at me. What happens in a small town is much quieter than that. It is that people are kind to you in a slightly careful way. It is a half-second of hesitation before somebody answers you. It is that, at church on Sunday, 2 families that always sit behind me sat somewhere else, and there is no possible way to ask anybody about a thing like that without sounding exactly like the man they have been told you are. Because there was a story going around, and it had been going around a lot longer than my trouble had. The story was that Grandpa Stucky has been slipping for about 2 years, that he forgets to pay things, that the poor kid has been quietly covering for him, that the boy has been paying his taxes out of his own pocket and never said a word about it to anybody, which is just like him. You see how good that is? Every fact in it is true except the direction. He had been in charge of the taxes. They were unpaid taxes. He had spent money at that courthouse. I never once got a phone call from him where he tried to convince me I was losing my mind. Not one. He did not have to. He said it to the whole county instead, in a tone of voice full of love and worry, and let the county say it back to me for a year. That is the part that got underneath, because after about 10 days of it, I started to wonder. I sat in a drill truck in front of the post office for 20 minutes one afternoon and could not make myself go in, and the whole time I was doing arithmetic about myself. When did I last balance anything? Did I know what the propane bill runs? What if I did forget? What if the boy had been carrying me and I was about to shame him in public over it? I want to tell you what got me out of that, because it was not courage and it was not somebody giving me a speech. I went home and I got the coffee can off the shelf above the washer, and I took out all 11 notebooks, and I sat at the kitchen table from 4 in the afternoon until it got dark, and I read 41 years of First Sundays in order. 1985 to now. Every month, the wet years where the water came up almost to the top of the casing, The 3 dry summers in a row in the middle 90s where I watched it fall a foot and a half and did not sleep well. The month after Alma's funeral where the number is there, in my hand, in the right column, on the right Sunday, because I went out and did it, because it was Sunday. And the handwriting on the last page is the same handwriting as the first page, a little shakier. Same hand. I did not find my mind in that can. I found my hand. A man who is losing his grip does not keep a 41-year record with no gaps in it. And more than that, I had the record. If you have got a record, you do not have to argue about what you remember. That is the entire reason we write things down. The next morning I called Adele Pretty and I said, "Tell me about the fellow from over east." His name was Orville Tiedemann, 72 years old. Sold implements for 30 years in a town 2 counties over and got out at the right time. He was the money in Meadowlark. He was not a crook. He was a retired man doing what retired men with a little money do, which is put it into something local that pays better than the bank and let a younger fellow do the running around. And here is where Adele taught me the second thing I did not know, and it is the thing I would most like you to take home. She said, "We are not going to sue anybody. Suing is slow and it is expensive and it hands the other side a year to work on you." She said, "We are going to put the truth in front of the only person in this arrangement who has something to lose and has not done anything wrong yet." So she made up a packet. It was not a threat. There was not one hard word in it. It was a copy of the 1-page lease. Alma typed with the tax clause on it, a certified copy of the county card in Colby's handwriting with the date on it, and 1 page of plain language about what happens to a tax certificate when the man who bought it was the man who owed the tax. And then she did the part that I would not have thought of. She did not mail it. She drove it out there herself on a Thursday and handed it to him at his back door and said, "Mr. Tiedemann, I am not asking you for anything, and you do not owe me a word. I am just not willing to let you find this out later." He read it at his own kitchen table while she stood there. Then he said, "Excuse me," and he went in the other room and called his own lawyer, and his own lawyer told him the same thing in about 90 seconds. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Orville Tiedemann was out of Meadowlark Land Holdings. He did not sue anybody either. He just took his money and went home, and the machine that was coming for my place had no fuel in it anymore. That is the whole trick, and it is not a trick. You do not have to beat the man who is doing it to you. You just have to put one true page in front of whoever is standing next to him, because the people standing next to him have almost always been lied to as well. I thought that was the end of it. I truly did. I figured Colby would let the whole thing die quietly and the taxes would get paid, and in 3 or 4 years we would sit on the porch and not talk about it. Then on a Tuesday, Adele called me and said a postal inspector named Raina had called her office. He was coming to Pelland on Thursday morning. He was going to talk to everybody whose name was in the file, which meant Delhauser and Bud and me, and the man who filed the complaint. All of us. Same morning, same building. There is a back room in the Pelland post office that I had never been in. It is where the parcels go and where the empty hampers stack up, and there is a folding table in the middle of it with a coffee maker on a stool. Thursday morning. It had 6 chairs around it. The inspector's name was Augustine Raina. He was maybe 50. He wore a gray suit that had been in a car all night, and he had a hard shell case that he set on the floor and never opened. He shook everybody's hand, and he got his own coffee. Bud Seacat was there because it is his building. There was a young man there named Tommy Dela Cruz, who was Dell's union steward, and who drove up from Aberdeen, and who was the only person in the room who looked like he wanted to fight somebody. Dell sat with her hands in her lap. She had not been in that building in 5 weeks. She had worn her uniform. I sat down at the end where I could see the door, and at 9:05 Colby walked in, and he had on a clean-pressed shirt, and he shook the inspector's hand first, before anybody else's, and he said good morning like a man who has come to a meeting, he called. Because that is what he thought it was. He had filed a complaint. He was the complainant. He believed he was there to help them do something about the mail carrier. Let me be plain about what came next, because if you were waiting for me to stand up and make a speech, there was no speech, and I have been grateful about that ever since. Inspector Raina asked Dell 3 questions. He asked her when she first noticed the forwarding order. He asked her whether she had ever removed, held, opened, or delayed any item addressed to me, and he asked her whether she had spoken to me about it. She answered all 3. Yes to the last one. She said, "I told him. I knew the rule, and I told him anyway." And Raina wrote for a second, and then he said, "Thank you," and then he said something I did not expect, and neither did she. He said, "For the record, you were the one who reported this. Everything downstream of this file starts with you." Dell put her hand over her mouth. Then he turned to Colby and he said, "Sir, I want to show you something, and I want you to take your time." He slid a photocopy across that folding table, face up. He said, "Would you read the name on the top line out loud for me?" Colby read my name. He said, "Would you read the new address?" Colby read the post office box. He said, "And would you read the date?" Colby read the 5th of March. And then Inspector Reyna said, "All right, now would you tell me where you were that day?" And my grandson said he did not remember. And Reyna said, "That is fine, because I do. That request came in from a telephone, and a telephone leaves a record, and the request came from your telephone at 10:22 in the morning from a truck stop in Salina, Kansas on the 5th of March, and you signed the certification on it, which says that you are the person named above, or that you are authorized to act for him." Then he sat back and he said one more sentence, and he said it kindly, which somehow made it 1,000 times worse. He said, "Son, filing one of those on somebody else is a federal offense. It is not a mistake. There is no version of that form where you press the wrong button." Nobody said anything for a while. Bud looked at the floor. The coffee maker made its noise. And then Reyna looked at me and said, "Mr. Stucky, is there anything you would like to say?" I had one thing. I had been holding it for 6 weeks, and I had thought it was going to be about the farm, and it turned out it was not about the farm at all. I said, "Colby, look at me." And he did. "And I will carry his face out of that room for the rest of my life." I said, "When the bills quit coming to my house, what did you think I was going to do?" He did not answer. I said, "I need to know which one it was. Did you think I would not notice, or did you think I would not be able to? That is the whole thing. That is what it costs. It is not the money, and it never was." And he broke. Right there at a folding table with a hamper of parcels behind him and his union steward and his postmaster watching, my son's boy put both hands flat on that table and told the truth for the first time in 2 years. He had bought a combine at the top of the market. The wheat run had gone bad 2 summers back. A big customer in Oklahoma went under owing him and never paid, and he had rolled his operating note twice. He paid my taxes the first year like the lease said. Then the second year he did not have it, and he did not say anything because he had spent his whole life being the one who has it. And then the second year turned into the third year, and by then the amount was big enough that telling me meant telling me all of it. He said the box was so I would not see the delinquent notice. He said the card at the courthouse was so I would not see the next one. He said he went to that December sale meaning to just hold the paper until he got right, and that he had told himself, standing in that hallway, that he was protecting me. And then he said the truest thing anybody said in that room the whole morning. He said, "And then it got easy, Grandpa. That is what I cannot explain to you. After the first one, it just got easy." Nobody in that room enjoyed 1 second of it. I put that down deliberately because I know the shape these stories usually take. There was never a moment in there where I felt good. Here is how it came out. The complaint against Del Hauser was withdrawn in writing that morning, at that table, in Colby's hand, and Inspector Reyna took it and read it and said it was not enough and made him write it again with the actual facts in it. She was back on Route 2 9 days later with a paper in her file that says the allegation was unfounded. That is not the same as an apology, so I saw to it that she got one of those too, in person, at her own kitchen table, from the man who owed it to her, with me sitting there. The federal end of it was never mine to drop, and I would not have lied to you about it if it had been. It went where it goes. He got a lawyer. What I did was tell them the truth, all of it, including the part where I burned the letter in March, and then I stayed out of the way. On the Monday, I went to the courthouse with a cashier's check, and I redeemed my own place. It came to a number that any man in his county could have written a check for, and that is the part that still makes me sit down. All of it. The boxes and the cards and the corporation and the year of my life was over a bill about the size of a good used pickup. Colby stood there against the wall and watched me pay it because I told him to. He did not say anything. Neither did I. The certificate died. It never had a chance of turning into a deed, and it never did. Not because I was smart, because 40 years ago somebody wrote a rule that says a man cannot get rich off of the promise he broke, and because my wife typed 1 page instead of shaking a hand. There are 2 more things, and then I will let you go. The first is the list. If you take anything out of an old man talking for an hour, take these, because every one of them is free and takes about 10 minutes. Call your county treasurer and ask them whose name and whose address is on the card for your property. Not whether they mailed it. Whose name is on the card. You are allowed to ask, and you do not have to give a reason. If a letter shows up at your house saying somebody requested to move your mail, do not throw it away. That is not advertising. That is the only warning you are going to get, and I burned mine. And if somebody you love offers to take the paper off your hands, let them help you open it. Do not let them receive it. A person sitting beside you at your own table going through your own mail is one thing entirely. A person getting your mail at their address is something else altogether. The first one is help. The second one is a wall, and by the time you can see it, it is already up. The second thing is about the water. Prue turned 8 in April. On the first Sunday of every month now, she comes out with me after church, and she is the one who stands at the top and reads the chalk line off the tape and calls the number down to me, and I write it in the notebook with a carpenter's pencil, which is exactly the job her great-grandmother had for 38 years, and which I never once thought about giving to anybody else. Her daddy comes some months. He stands back by the shop, and he does not say much, and neither do I, and he is doing what he has to do, and he is doing it, and that is all I am going to say about him, because he is still my boy's boy. And in March, I did something I had never thought of in 41 years. There is a program in this state that keeps track of groundwater. They have got 1,600 wells. They watch all over for years and years so that somebody in the future can look back and see what the water actually did instead of what everybody remembers it doing. I called them, and I asked if a private record was worth anything to them. A fellow drove out from Pierre. He sat at my kitchen table and went through 11 spiral notebooks for 2.5 hours, and when he got up, he told me that they did not have anything on this aquifer that goes back that far in one hand. So those numbers are not in a coffee can above my washing machine anymore. They are in the public record, where anybody can pull them up forever, including a man who has not been born yet, who is going to want to know what the water was doing in his township in 1987. That is what I have got instead of revenge, and I find that I do not want the other thing. I spent my whole life being paid to find out the truth about a piece of ground, and I never once got it by guessing, and I never once got it while everything was running and making noise. You have to shut it off. You have to let it get quiet. And then you go, and you measure, and you write down what the tape actually says, even when the number is not the one you were hoping for. So shut the pump off once in a while. Let it go still. Then go look at your own numbers with your own eyes and write down what you see, because in 43 years, the only well that ever fooled me was the one I did not measure.